Howdy, howdy, howdy. My name is Anachi Sasuke. Welcome back to Let's Read the SCP Foundation Wiki. Before we start, I want to apologize because I am stupid. There were supposed to be. I wanted to have there be an SCP video every day last week, but I had technical difficulties on my end regarding a USB hub I was using so that I could use my wireless headset. So I thought I had to go find a new USB hub and wasted time trying to do that when all I really needed to do was use a wired headset. So, like I said, I'm stupid. But in this episode, we're going to be starting with, where are we? Interactive Kaleidoscope, and then we're going to go to Clockwork Octopus, Piles of Everything, Truth, Self-Supplying Gasoline Pump, and we might actually go further than that. I haven't decided yet. So let's start with the Kaleidoscope and see what happens. It's safe, because it's just a kaleidoscope. Site 916 is situated 100 meters from the northern edge of SCP-1181. Is it a giant kaleidoscope? Patrol teams monitor the perimeter of 1181, and any civilians that come near the perimeter are to be escorted away by personnel posing as game preserve rangers, and ultrasonic deterrent devices to remain active near the center of 1181 to prevent activation. The device's full strength range is 300 meters and weakens until ineffectual at 500 meters. The ultrasonic deterrent and its backup generator, not generation, is to have daily maintenance checks to ensure it is functioning properly. All staff working within the range of the ultrasonic deterrent are to be equipped with sound negating equipment. Site 916 also contains 1181-1, which is kept as secure containment room 916-4 for low-risk objects. Access to 1 is restricted to level 4 personnel and above. Description: SCP-1181 is a circular clearing 2,048 meters in diameter and a forest located in Game Preserve and Redacted. When a living animal, or a portion of a living animal, passes through the center, 1181 and its barrier activates. No other animal will be able to pass into 1181 from the outside, and any other animal inside when it's activated will not be able to leave until it is deactivated. The outside of the barrier of 1181 is impenetrable until it is deactivated. The barrier is a sphere surrounding 1181. The barrier cannot be sensed except by touch. The sensation is described as similar to touching cold glass. It also cannot be detected by any known instruments, as objects present on the perimeter when 1181 is activated will be split apart either side of the perimeter. Once the activator moves a random distance between 2 and 8 meters from the center of 1181, 3 other exact copies of the activator will appear around the center of it, facing outwards from the center, arranged equally separate from each other, 90 degrees apart. Each of the 3 copies will move identically to the activator, so it's describing how kaleidoscopes work. The activator continues to move away from the center, and its copies will be copied again at random distances from the center. The 3 additional copies will appear at around point around a meter behind the activator or copy. Should any simultaneously created copies occupy the same space, the bodies will be fused together. Usually the fusing results in rapid expiration of these copies. If a newly created copy occupies the space of the activator or an already existing copy, the newly created copy will be spawned missing the portions of their body where the existing occupant of the space was, usually resulting in quick, if not instantaneous, death from blood loss. Living, fused, and or mutilated copies, and copies that block each other's paths, will still attempt to the best of their ability to mimic the activator's movements. If the activator, or its copies, touches the inside of the barrier of 1181, they will begin to combust. If the person or a copy on fire is copied, they will spawn copies that are also aflame. Tests with disposable dudes asked to touch and describe the physical texture of the inside wall of the barrier have so far been inconclusive, because fire. SCP-1181 will deactivate if the activator passes through the center point a second time or dies. Should the activator die, all their copies and any remains will disappear. Should the subject pass through the center for a second time, all copies and any remains of the copies will disappear, and any injuries the activator sustained will be healed. Recovery log. SCP-1181 came to the Foundation's attention when a local hunter reported a swarm of butterflies thick as a cloud in the preserve. When the barrier was discovered, Temporary Containment Protocol 76 Cherry was initiated. The swarm was monitored for several days by Foundation personnel before it disappeared. Upon discovery that the barrier had disappeared along with the swarm, the area was investigated. During the investigation, Agent Havelock activated 1181 and died shortly after. Following this incident, Site-916 was built, permanent containment protocols put in place, and research into 1181 commenced. 4 weeks after the completion of Site-916, one was found during a patrol of the perimeter. Okay, so test A. Disposable class 1033. 1033 was asked to walk in a straight line from point A on one side of 1181 through the center to point B on the opposite side, and not stop for any reason. They would be the only subject present in 1181. A UAV fitted with a video camera would record the test from above. Results. When 1083 passed through the center, the barrier activated. Once they had walked 5 meters past the center, 3 copies appeared around the center of 1181 at 90-degree intervals. The subject did not notice the copies. When they had walked 17 meters past the center, he and the other copies of himself manifested 3 additional copies. Subject turned and noticed the copies of himself, which caused him to panic. He and his copies screamed and ran towards point B despite warnings to remain at a walking pace. The 4 copies that had spawned facing backwards ran towards the center of 1181. When the copies came into contact with each other, they attempted to mimic 1033's movements further, despite physically obstructing each other to the point of futility. As he continued to walk towards point B, activated several copying points. When the subject was 300 meters from the center, there were over 16,000 copies, some fused or otherwise mutilated. Uninjured copies continued to run in various directions, mimicking the subject. Immediately after 1033 passed the 500 meters from the center, there were over 60,000 copies, interfering with other copies' progress and spawning more copies. At this point, much of the ground was covered with fused and mutilated corpses as well as blood. Copies continued to mimic D-1033 and spawn more copies, or attempt to, despite impediments and injury. When the subject arrived at point B, and he and all the copies of himself yelled, "Yes, finally!" As 1033 and all the copies which came into contact with the perimeter, they burst into flame, screaming and rolling around. All other living copies rolled and screamed regardless of if they were on fire. 7 minutes after coming into contact with the perimeter, the subject died from 3rd-degree burns. The extensiveness of these burns was not able to be verified. The subject and all copies disappeared, including blood, organs, and smoke. Barrier deactivated. Test B. Disposable 1059. The subject was told to walk in a straight line from point A on one side to point B, 20 meters from the center, and then turn and head back to the center, point C, 5 meters from the center. The subject would wait at point C for 10 minutes, then walk through the center again towards point D, 500 meters from the center, then turn around and return to the center. They were told not to stop for any reason. 1059 will be the only subject present in 1181. The subject was informed of the clearing's nature prior to the test to lessen the chance of panic during the test. A UAV fitted with a video camera would record from above. Results. After activating 1181, 1059 moved to point B. Being forewarned, she did not panic when she saw copies of herself, although she was visibly startled. The subject then turned and walked towards the center of 1181. 2 meters from the center, 1059 began to struggle through the scrum of her copies as she made her way to the center. After 2 minutes, all the copies disappeared. 1181 deactivated. 1059 was seen crawling towards point C, where she waited for 10 minutes before walking through the center point towards point D, reactivating 1181. Upon reaching point D, the subject turned and headed towards the center of 1181. Once D-1059 was 250 meters from the center, she ran into resistance from her copies, and her progress towards the center was slowed. 5 minutes later, visual confirmation of 1059 was lost in a pile of bodies 50 meters from the center. 4 minutes later, 1059 and all her clones disappeared, and 1181 deactivated. Presumed suffocated. Analysis of tests. Study of the UAV recordings of subjects interacting with 1181 show 1181's radial symmetry. Any 1/4 of 1181 is identical to the other 3, no matter how many copies there are, or how they are moving, despite mutilation, pileups, blood, etc. So far, it seems that nothing can be done by the subject interacting with SCP-1181 to ruin the perfect symmetry. Analysis of 1. Description. SCP-1181-1 is a large stone tablet with an inscription chiseled into it. The type of rock was consistent with local geology. The language of the inscription is not known. Decode an inscription. For such a thing to be created without means to destroy it, it can only be unforgiving maliciousness, unforgivable stupidity, or perhaps both. I will never know. The symmetrical plaque Plague enveloped the planet, but for the mountains, valleys, and seas, each hemisphere an identical wedge of swarming redacted, with the source as its polar center. The source only a point in space, with nothing to identify it or give warning. The planet was abandoned, but there was nowhere to go, and the cold cradle of black space could not be our home. In our calm, silent despair, we elected to spend our last days in the pursuit of a hope that was both for ourselves and not for ourselves. With what was salvaged, we did what we could. May this barrier serve you well, or God help you. So it sounds like the Kaleidoscope destroyed somebody's planet, and the barrier exists so that it doesn't destroy anything else. Wonder who made it. Clockwork Octopus probably didn't, but maybe it'll be interesting. The Clockwork Octopus is also safe. SCP-1182 is essentially harmless, and as such is to be contained in a standard locker. Because of the object's unique mental effects, usage of it is not permitted unless at least one level 2/1182 clearance staff member is present. Description: SCP-1182 is a small octopus sculpture approximately 171 millimeters in length and 76 millimeters in breadth, weighing 312 grams. It is constructed from a combination of wire, copper, and titanium alloy. The head of the octopus contains a clockwork contraption that serves no documented purpose. When held by a subject who will henceforth be referred to as SCP-1182-1, 1182 and -1 become effectively invisible. 1182 causes the subject to camouflage perfectly with their surroundings. The sculpture causes an as-of-yet unexplained reaction on -1's pigmentation, giving it the properties of an octopus in disguise. This also means that the subject can only achieve full invisibility while naked, as the effect does not extend to clothing. The camouflage is distinctly much better than that of a common octopus, as -1 blends in to the point where it is impossible to distinguish their position. If 1182 is released, the subject appears to blink back into existence. Of note is the mental effect that the octopus has on -1. While holding 1182, the subject perceives the room as if it were filled completely with water. The presence of sea life from fish to coral to sea vegetation has been reported in all cases. Other personnel in the room were seen behaving as if submerged. Conversation with -1 is impossible as the subject hears only gurgling noises as if the speaker were communicating underwater. When -1 moves, they feel as though they are swimming. In 3 cases, -1 reported seeing their limbs as the tentacles of an octopus. SCP-1182's effects, both the camouflage and the hallucinations, only work if the octopus is in contact with the subject's skin. Tests involving holding the object through a glove and similar materials have yielded no results. Okay, so a safe one that does actually seem safe. It does nothing unless you touch it, and even if you do, all it does is make you invisible and hallucinate. And it could have made you hallucinate that you were drowning. Didn't do that, so good on the octopus. Let me go back to the name of this one. Piles of everything, and they're Euclid. So, the airspace in a 25-kilometer radius around 1183 is designed as designated a no-fly zone. Any unauthorized aircraft or seagoing vessels entering this radius are to be informed that they are entering a military exclusion zone and rerouted. Aircraft or vessels which do not heed this warning are to be intercepted and detained. The affected area of 1183 itself is not to be entered within 2 hours of its expected manifestation events. Observers are to promptly report each new manifestation. And there's a picture of it after manifesting bison skulls on something 1800 something. If manifested objects present a significant threat to health or safety and cannot be contained, site personnel are to evacuate to sea until the next manifestation occurs. Personnel are not to consume food or beverages manifested by 1183. Description: SCP-1183 is a remote island in the South Pacific, 18 kilometers long by 8 kilometers wide, located at coordinate something 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 south something 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 west. Every 126 hours and 14 minutes, 1183 manifests a pile of objects covering up to 85% of its surface. The objects appear instantaneously and silently, and all objects remaining from the previous manifestation simultaneously vanish. The area of 1183 covered by the objects changes from manifestation to manifestation, and freshly uncovered areas possess low vegetation consistent with local ecology. The manifested objects always belong to a single class. The breadth of these classes varies somewhat, such as the blank 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 manifestation of laptop computers of all makes and models, and the subsequent blank 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 manifestation of Apple MacBook Pro laptop computers, but in no case has the class been so narrow that it was difficult to determine its identity. For small classes with a few well-known individual instances, the manifested objects have always been observed to include every instance of that object class which is known to have existed. For more numerous objects, it is impossible to determine exact numbers, but estimates of the number of objects on 1183 are generally agree closely with estimates of the number of such objects to have ever existed. On a side note, I think I'm probably going to have to stop at the normal 5 because it looks like it's about to thunderstorm. It's really dark. And I don't like to record when it's storming because it can mess with the videos. Anyway, of the blank manifestations recorded by the Foundation to date, 76% have been man-made objects and 16% have consisted of human or animal body parts. Objects manifested by 1183 appear normal in every way while they remain, and man-made objects appear in like-new, ready-to-use condition. This is true even for objects known to have been completely destroyed or, in the case of spacecraft, sent elsewhere in the solar system. No living organisms have been observed to manifest. Is there going to be one that's just a whole bunch of copies of the Atari ET game? Because that'd be kind of funny. So, selected observations. Objects observed? Bibles. Notes. Due to the wide variation of sizes of individual copies, estimates of the number of Bibles present range from 3 billion to 6 billion. The pile was searched for early copies of potential historical significance, but given the number of copies present, an exhaustive search was not possible. The earliest copy located dated to 1607. Next test, Coca-Cola brand soft drink cans. An estimated 1 billion cans of Coca-Cola brand soft drink and a large conical pile with a maximum height of approximately 60 meters. Laboratory mice were given only the soda to drink. Mice given only the soda to drink showed no ill effects until the next manifestation, after which they quickly expired. Based on this result, eating or drinking materials manifested by 1183 is prohibited. Next test, Saturn V launch vehicles. All 15 flight-ready Saturn V launch vehicles observed lying side by side on the ground, fully assembled and fueled. The vehicles were extremely cold due to cryogenic fuel, and 1183 was evacuated after initial investigation due to concerns of a potential explosion. Next one, human left ears. An estimated 1.2 million kilograms of left ears are present, representing approximately 60 billion individuals. There was just a large thud through the building I'm in that I felt in my chest and it scared me, sorry. Ears were initially warm and showed no signs of decay, but decay progressed normally until their disappearance. DNA analysis found normal human DNA representing individuals of a variety of races. Next test, objects observed, unknown. The previous manifestation disappeared as expected, but no new manifestation was discovered. It has been suggested that a manifestation may have in fact occurred, but the object or objects were small enough or inconspicuous enough to have escaped notice. Next one, British castles. Every known British castle was represented, along with 5 unknown castles, which may represent previously destroyed instances. The castles were arranged haphazardly within the affected area, but were situated upright and on the ground. Furnishings were not present. Next up, croissants. A pile of croissants 80 meters high at its highest point, covering 6 square kilometers of 1183. Estimating the number of croissants was complicated by the presumed heavy compression of the lower layers by the weight of the upper layers, but the average of the estimate was 126 billion croissants. And lastly, SCP objects possessing or related to redacted abilities. 18 seemingly unrelated objects appeared. Several of the objects were immediately identified as SCP objects, all related to redacted, and 1183 was promptly evacuated. Due to the danger involved, the manifested objects were not tested to see if they retained the anomalous abilities of the originals. Using photographs of the objects taken prior to evacuation, 7 of the objects were matched against SCP objects in Foundation custody. The remaining 11 objects may represent SCP objects to which 1183's researchers do not have clearance to access, or they may represent objects which are not currently in custody. As the potential for 11 uncontained objects possessing redacted abilities represents a significant threat, photographs of these objects have been forwarded to a level 4 review team for further evaluation. And this one was Euclid, right? Because they can't really contain it, but it's not doing anything to anyone. It doesn't seem to spawn things that are alive, at least. 1184 is truth. Truth is safe. Is it, though? SCP-1184 is stored in a secure locker site someplace. Access to 1184 requires, it used to say level 4, but now it says level 5 authorization and a complete test script. While SCP-1184 is in use, no fewer than 2 armed guards wearing purpose-built soundproof headgear with an external audio feed and recording hardware, and thus able to hear the test without being subjected to the effects, will monitor the test to ensure that the script is followed. Any deviation from the script will result in detainment or termination. Description: SCP-1184 appears to be a simple gold ring in the style of a wedding band and engraved with the word Veritas, the Latin word for truth. I guess that's what the Veritas serum is. 1184 has an unusually high density of 21.2 grams per centimeter cubed, higher than almost any terrestrial material, and thus the visible gold surface is believed to be plated over another possibly exotic material. Only non-destructive testing has been permitted on 1184 to date, and therefore the composition of its interior cannot be verified. While wearing SCP-1184, everything the wearer, henceforth known as the Speaker, says is accepted as the absolute truth by anyone able to hear and understand them, henceforth known as the listeners. Simple, easily accepted statements are taken at face value without apparent surprise, as with instructed disposable dues that they will in fact receive a full pardon at the end of the month. Statements which are clearly at odds with reality, such as, "I know this looks like an ordinary ballpoint pen, but it is in fact the nuclear aircraft carrier USS Enterprise," may create a significant amount of cognitive dissonance depending on the listener and situation. Listeners have been observed reacting to impossible statements in several ways. 1. Simply accepting the statement as fact without regard for its impossibility. Listeners are told that a pen is an aircraft carrier, and exhibiting this reaction would subsequently identify the pen as an aircraft carrier without appearing to find this fact remarkable. This is by far the most common reaction, and most test subjects never seem to notice anything unusual, no matter how impossible their beliefs are. 2. Inventing, sometimes quite elaborate, confabulations to explain away the impossibility of their beliefs. Listeners exhibiting this reaction may invent fantastic stories involving shrink rays and disguise generators to explain how the ship came to resemble a pen. 3. Very rarely, listeners may conclude that the failure to properly perceive reality is their own fault. Listeners exhibiting this reaction may appear confused and claim that they are hallucinating or believe themselves to be suffering from other mental problems. Depending upon the nature of the implanted belief, this may cause extreme stress and anxiety over their inability to see the truth of the situation, and this may lead to actual psychological problems manifesting even in previously healthy individuals. There are no recorded cases of any subjects either realizing that their beliefs have in some way been manipulated, or concluding that their implanted beliefs are untrue, no matter how seriously they disagree with reality or how plainly the effect is explained to them. Even 1184 itself cannot override beliefs previously implanted by it. The subject is unable to conclude that either belief is false, even if they directly conflict. A conflict between two 1184 beliefs appear to have a higher risk of causing a psychotic break than a conflict between the belief and reality, but the effect has not been quantified. Despite being absolutely convinced of the truth of statements heard under the influence of 1184, listeners remain able to accept future changes of state. For instance, telling a listener that this door is closed convinces them that the door is currently closed, not that the door can never at any point in the future be open. If the door were in fact open, a listener might walk over to the open door, which they had been told was closed, pantomime opening the door, and then walk through it without incident, interacting normally with the door in the future. 1184's effect only manifests when both the speaker and listeners understand the language being spoken, and listeners are hearing the sound directly from the speaker's lips. In particular, the following situations have never been observed to cause any anomalous effects to manifest. A speaker reading an unfamiliar foreign language phrase to native speakers of the language. A speaker silently communicating with deaf listeners via mutually understood sign language. A deaf listener lip-reading the speaker's words, and listening to the speaker indirectly via any sort of electronic sound reproduction, whether in real time or recorded. Attempts to utilize 1184 for its beneficial effects have been hampered by the fact that it also affects the speaker, who will become equally convinced of the truth of their statements. This has proven true even in the case of speakers who cannot hear themselves, as even completely deaf speakers, unlike deaf listeners, have proven to be subject to 1184's effects. As no means of directly using 1184 without being subject to its effects has yet been discovered, the following indirect test procedure forms the foundation of all 1184 use. Test procedure 1184 Sigma. Secure test subjects within the chamber. Researcher enters the chamber carrying but not wearing 1184. Researcher Johns 1184 repeats the following passage verbatim. It is vitally important that you do not voluntarily do or say anything unless I specifically tell you otherwise. In particular, you must not touch the ring I am now wearing unless I tell you otherwise. Researcher removes the ring and places it on the table in the room and then exits the test chamber. The researcher triggers a pre-recorded message in his voice instructing one of the subjects to don the ring. Pre-recorded message instructs the ring wearer to repeat his words verbatim and then continues very slowly and clearly with the message to be delivered to subjects. Pre-recorded message instructs ring wearer to remove the ring, place it on the table, and step away from it. Researcher enters the room and retrieves 1184. The researcher leaves the room and uses the intercom to inform the subjects that they may speak and act normally again. When properly followed, this procedure results in all test subjects being implanted with the desired beliefs without adversely affecting any SCP personnel. Strict adherence to the procedure is essential, as mistakes can and have led to loss of life or breaches of security. In particular, the word voluntarily was added to the test protocol after a subject apparently decided that do not do or say anything meant that she could not breathe. The requirements for a pre-recorded speech was instituted after several incidents of flubbed lines by researchers. The consequences of these mistakes were generally relatively minor, but in the most extreme case, data expunged. The initial speech to the test subjects must still be given live by the researcher for 1184 to function, and thus has been kept short to minimize the chance of mistakes. The test subject wearing 1184 remains a weak point in the process, as any misunderstanding or mistake in repeating the pre-recorded speech's words can result in the wrong message being delivered. The 1184 test chamber is equipped with an airtight door, separate ventilation system, and hydrogen cyanide gas canisters for this eventuality. During incident 1184-7, Dr. Blank, the then head researcher on 1184, deliberately deviated from his test script, instructing the D-Class personnel to data expunged and using 1184 to force everyone else he encountered to assist him with his plans. Over the course of his escape attempt, Dr. Blank made 47 known statements while wearing 1184 and at least blank more which could not be deciphered from available security footage. Dr. Blank was of course familiar with the test procedure and worded his statements carefully to avoid deluding himself, but shortly before exiting the facility it seems that a careless mistake caused him to convince himself that data expunged, and he was easily captured and terminated. His final statement was inaudible in security footage, but the leading theory is that he had stated something to the effect of data expunged upon realizing that the site had gone on full lockdown, thus rendering himself helpless. After careful psychological screening and review of security footage, many of the staff affected by Incident 7 were eventually cleared to return to active duty. The affected disposables were redacted. The current Level 5 approval and armed guard requirements were instituted in the wake of this incident. History: 1184 was discovered in a mental facility in blankety blank after reports of strange incidents came to the Foundation's attention. A Foundation team discovered 1184 being warned by a patient known only as the King of Blank, being waited upon hand and foot by doctors, nurses, and other patients. The patient's true identity is unknown, as his name badge, room identification, and all medical records consistently refer to him as the King of Blank. All doctors, nurses, and patients in the facility suffer from a wide range of delusional beliefs concerning him, and the Foundation team charged with investigating the incident quickly fell under the King's power. A backup team with soundproof headgear was able to neutralize the King and his sycophants, ultimately determining that the gold ring he wore was the source of his unusual power. Interrogating the King regarding 1184 proved futile, as the repeated careless use of 1184 had left him deluded about his history, location, and identity. Incident 7 Follow-up. Given that 1184 was involved in at least one unauthorized use and may have been used on any of us before, during, or after that incident, there is no way for us to truly verify our facts. We believe that Dr. Blank was undone by a careless misstatement, captured, and ultimately terminated. We believe that we are still in possession of the genuine 1184 and not a worthless replica or merely an empty locker. We believe that we have brought in unaffected individuals from other Foundation sites in order to verify these facts. We believe that they have done so. We believe that we are researchers working for the Foundation. We believe that we may show up to work every day and study various objects, including SCP-1184. We believe that we have homes, spouses, and children, but we have no means of determining, even in theory, if any of these facts are actually true, or are merely delusions instilled by a user of 1184. Dr. Blank. It must suck to work with that SCP then. And then that brings us to the self-supplying gasoline pump, which is Euclid. Special containment procedures. All currently known instances of 1185 are to be maintained in storage site blank, with the exception of 1185-3, which will remain installed in its original location and must be monitored at all times. Instances of 1185 in storage are to be isolated from soil and other organic mediums at all times. Soil and organic media used in testing must be isolated from outside contact until the instance of 1185 undergoing testing is removed from the area. Description: SCP-1185 is a collective designation for a set of gasoline pumps, featuring identical manufacturer's marks and anomalous effects. Instances of 1185 vary in age and design, in all cases appearing identical to other pumps installed in their facilities. The oldest known instance, resembling and installed alongside several Guild Barco Model 66 pumps, was installed in a rural Chilean town from 19-something until its discovery in 2000-something, while the newest, resembling a Dresser Wayne Century 2200 series pump, was only 1 month old at time of discovery and removal by Foundation agents. All instances currently known possess identical manufacturer's markings on the base of the pump, though all other markings on the visible areas of the pump appear normal for the assumed model and manufacturer. These markings refer to a Live Water Incorporated, an apparently fictitious corporation, the existence of which has yet to be substantiated. Employees and owners of fueling stations where instances of 1185 have been located report no familiarity with any such corporation, and in all cases the means of delivery and installation have been identical to common practice for non-anomalous pumps. When in close proximity to soil, instances of 1185 extend fibrous tendrils from their bases towards the soil. These tendrils are metallic in composition and are capable of penetrating several inches of concrete or asphalt should such stand between them and a mass of soil. Upon contact with suitably nutrient-rich soil, these tendrils branch out to form a pseudo-root system of metallic fibers. The material composing the tendrils is an unknown metallic compound, which rapidly destabilizes and breaks down into various metal ions, primarily lead and copper, should the tendrils be disturbed. These fibers are hollow, allowing them to convey organic molecules to the pump, where an as yet undetermined series of chemical reactions convert them into their component molecules of gasoline fuel. The exact composition of the fuel varies between instances, generally matching that of gasoline produced during the period of the pump's installation, and the process of conversion has no apparent mechanism. The substances extracted from soil appear to spontaneously break down and reassemble into the new molecular structures while passing through the pump. Disassembling and reassembling the pump has no effect on its anomalous properties, and installing any of an instance's components into other pumps of the same model will cause all components of that pump to take on the same anomalous properties. On initial installation, instances of 1185 draw organic material from soil within a 1 meter radius of the point of contact. Once soil resources have been drained to a degree that would render the supply inadequate, the pump's tendrils extend further, resulting in its effects encompassing wider areas and causing increased depletion of soil resources. As operation of the pump continues, the increasingly widespread depletion of soil organic content begins to cause malnutrition in local flora and ground-based fauna. In cases where pump usage is especially prolonged or frequent, total ecosystem collapse can and will occur as the pump consumes and processes all available organic resources. Addendum 1185-001. On 413 some year, a routine check on the fueling station where one was previously installed revealed similar anomalous properties in the new pump purchased as a replacement for the removed instance. The new pump was, according to the owner's bank statements, purchased from the same corporation that had provided the other two non-anomalous pumps in use. According to the interview transcripts, a corporate representative met with the station owner and offered a heavy discount on the replacement pump to offset the loss of profits caused by the malfunction of the formerly installed pump. Pump malfunction was indeed the cover story used by the task force charged with removing and securing one. On contacting and examining the records of the corporation in question, Foundation investigators found that a new pump was indeed shipped, but that no representative was ever sent, nor any discount offered, and that the funds received by the corporation were in accordance with the non-discounted price. The identity of the representative and source of the additional funds are currently under investigation. The pump, designated 1185-3, is to remain installed at its current location and be kept under surveillance in hopes of establishing further contact with the producers or modifiers of the objects. Okay, so it's a gas pumps that just have gas forever until they destroy the planet with it. Yeah. So anyway, that about does it for this episode of Let's Read the SCP Foundation Wiki. In the next episode, we'll be checking out cochlear cicadas, stationary ATV, matter displacing flashlight, the sound, and universal simulator. We're almost out of the 1100s finally, and it looks like SCP-1200 is going to be horrifying. So, if you like this video, a like and a subscribe will be groovy. If you didn't, you need to do either one of those things. If you want to click the bell, you can do that as well so that you're notified of future uploads. And I will see y'all in the next one. Later.